Hello everyone, I'm Brian and welcome back to part 2, hopefully the last one. So let's go ahead and get started. So that's exactly where I left off.
Powerful language. There is the tremendous fact of death. I'm quoting him. There is the tremendous fact of death. Everything dies. All our progress, our wealth, our achievement, our knowledge, all goes to death. Cities.
Sorry, pausing already. Excuse me. Everything dies and all our progress, our wealth and achievements and knowledge all to death. Without hearing if he's going to explain that, I would say no, our progress is passed on to the next generation. Our wealth, whether it be to the society or to your children, our knowledge, if you did not write it down or share it to anyone, then yes, that will go to death. That's the reason why we have stories, that's the reason why we have books, that's the reason why we have YouTube, because our knowledge can be passed on to the next generation. That's a way of benefiting and ensuring the next generation's success.
All goes to death.
So I will disagree at least at that point.
Cities crumble, cities are overtaken by forests. In India we have a saying, 1,000 years a city, 1,000 years a forest. Same place. He says mountains crumble to dust. Planets are blown away and into dust, and they become parts of the atmospheres of other planets. These are his actual words. And today we know tremendous explosions of supernova and entire solar systems wiped out. Death. The poet Rabindranath Tagore says, a leaf, dry leaf falls from the tree into a pond, setting off ripples. These ripples spread out into the universe among the stars and galaxies. Change and death everywhere. Vivekananda says, saints die and sinners die. Kings die and paupers die. The learned die and the ignorant die. All must die. And yet there is this tremendous clinging to life. We know it is certain that we will die. And yet the most powerful is clinging to life. And this is Maya, he says.
Interesting point. But that does not, in my opinion, change the purpose of life. How do I say, the ultimate purpose of life, I guess, being all life, not just human life, which is we fight to survive knowing that we'll die. All we're doing is prolonging our lives. Very true, but we live in other ways. We don't merely live as an individual, but we live as a species. So for example, that's the reason why we have children, is because we don't live forever. Therefore, our way of living forever is through our children, through our genes, not through an individual. That is where the false, I believe, false idea comes from, that we try to live forever as ourselves, but in reality we live forever through our children. Our genes, our knowledge are passed down through them. That is how we live forever, not through individual selves. So it is not necessarily an illusion, but it is an illusion that the individual has, that thinking that we try to survive as long as we can to live forever for ourselves, when in reality most species in the world lives on forever through their genes, through their children, because without children or genes, or without the ability to reproduce, once we're dead, we're gone forever. And that would be the illusion, that we think we could live forever when ultimately we all die, which is still true, but we continue living on through genes and through our children.
And this is Maya. I was reading Ernst Becker's The Denial of Death. It's a Pulitzer Prize winning book, a very dark book. There, he says, his basic thesis is that this tremendous fact of death is the prime motivating factor. The fear of death is the prime motivating factor for humanity. This fact of death is there, and we say, no, I'm not afraid of death. I don't think about it. He says, you don't think about it. Remember, he's a psychoanalyst, Freudian. Repression. You have suppressed it. So in Freudian psychoanalysis, and this is New York, at one time it was in fashion. Everybody, like, say, my guru is my therapist. So everybody had a therapist. The pricier, the more well-placed you are. And if you say you have a problem, yes, there's a solution. If you say you don't have a problem, I'm all right, I have a more serious problem, repression. I suppressed it.
Oh no, I'm in suppression or repression. And what I said about earlier about all the stuff I said, I mean, again, I just thought about it that time. I've never formulated in that way until then, even though those are some of the things that I believe. Again, about the fact that how the purpose of life, all life, is to continue living on, even though there's death awaits. It's not the life of the individual, but the life of the genes being passed on through our children, or through however means life continues on with whatever species they are. Again, merely just thought of it at that time. I haven't really fleshed it out, but I believe that's a decent answer. I could be wrong.
Somebody asked Freud, actually they asked, what is normal? Because whatever you say, you're abnormal. There's something wrong with you. And Freud gave a beautiful definition of normality. He said, the ability to do your work and to love. So if you're functional in your life, more or less, you can just take care of your business, your life, and you can relate to others normally, then you're normal. A very beautiful definition, actually. So in that book, he says, this tremendous fear of death is there. It haunts us, but we repress it. And in Freudian psychoanalysis, you cannot repress anything forever. It comes out. So it comes out, he says, in the form of what he calls immortality projects. All the great endeavors of human life, from raising a family, to making a business, to conquering an empire, all of that is our struggle to conquer death. I know I will die, and my reaction is this. I suppress it, and my reaction is this. Whether it's children, or a big organization, or an empire, or art, writing a book, becoming famous, I will live on. But they're all doomed to failure. Because the kind of immortality we want, this is not that kind of immortality. Or nationalism. I will die for my country and I will be immortal as the person who died for his country. But this is not really in our hearts. This is not what we want. What do we want? We want to live like this, not in that kind of immortality. Woody Allen here.
Exactly what I was saying earlier. We have this false idea that we ourselves are the things that want to live forever, when in reality, what lives forever from us and our species is our children.
Somebody asked him, you want to become immortal on the silver screen? You want to live forever in your movies and your books? And he said, typical Woody Allen, he said, no, I want to live forever in my apartment. That is true. We really, that kind of immortality, we all try to get it, but that's a poor substitute for what we secretly want. We want to exist. This clinging to life, this is Maya, he says, Swami Vivekananda.
I can agree with that. Yes, the fact that we think we can live forever or want to live forever and we're fighting death, and the reality is we will always come to death. All things must die. Well, tardigrade. I'm not sure about that one. But anyways, in terms of human speak, yes, we all eventually expire. The thing is, though, is that I remember some time ago scientists saying that our genes, something just turns them off, and that's the reason why we die. It's eventually they all just stop working, because how we're growing and all of this, it's just there. It's constantly being reproduced. Why aren't we dying at the age of 28? Why aren't we dying at the age of 50? Why aren't we dying at the age of 5? It's because these genes are on saying keep reproducing. And every 2 years or 8 years, everything in our body is completely new. So we have the ability to regenerate everything in our body, in a sense. Why do we just die all of a sudden? Slowly certain things are being turned off, but why? It's pre-programmed in our genes, I believe. Maybe when humanity is able to go deeper into the sciences and find out what that is, it'd be kind of scary to think of we can live forever. I wonder what that'd be like. Again, every 2 years or 8 years, everything in our body is brand new, completely different from what it was before. Our skins are like new almost every, I don't know, year or something. Like, I don't know how often you're shedding skin cells almost every day. So your skins are constantly being renewed. Your, again, 2 to 8 years, everything in your body, your brain, your hair, everything is completely brand new, a whole new you, yet you're still you. Why does it stop? That's one thing I remember hearing some time ago.
Then this tremendous contradiction in knowledge. We feel that we can know, and we are knowing more and more and more. But as we go forward, we run into paradoxes. We run into eternal time, is his words. We run into immeasurable space and the endless walls of causation. Time, space, and causation seems to hem us in, bind us, set a limit to our knowledge. I was reading Kurt Gödel. There's a biography written by Rebecca Goldstein. She's a professor here in Barnard College. So in the introduction, she says, the great discoveries in physics of the 20th century, look at the names. Einstein's theory of relativity, Heisenberg's principle of uncertainty, Gödel's theorem of incompleteness. Look at the names. So when she writes that, it struck me suddenly. Relativity, uncertainty, incompleteness. These are the very words used by the ancient philosophers to describe Maya. And these are the final, almost, discoveries of physics in the 20th century. John Barrows wrote a book called Impossibility, where he shows in every field, as the field advances far enough, as it advances, you get the feeling we'll know everything. But as it advances far enough, deep enough, you end up with certain insoluble contradictions, paradoxes, limits to knowledge. By the way, it's interesting. In the first week of April, here in New York, in the New School, there's going to be a workshop, 2-day workshop. And guess what the title is?
Impossibilities?
Unknowability. Oh. Each session, unknowability in life, in social sciences, unknowability in physics, unknowability in mathematics. John Barrows is speaking. Rebecca Goldstein is speaking also. And it's open to the public in the New School.
Why can't I have stuff like that? I would love to ask a question. Is it because the limitation for our equipment? Mind you, before we have all this modern equipment, we didn't think we could go any deeper into the human body or look at the human cells and stuff. I'm assuming even back in the day, they're saying, oh, the impossibilities, the unknowing of the human body, because we can never see what the skin is made out of. And then we got new equipment. And I'm wondering, I say this, with enough time, I think everything can happen. I think with enough time, everything can happen. And I say this because of what's his name? Nostradamus. And I wanted to say this in one other video, but I can't remember what the video is. But Nostradamus made a lot of prediction. I genuinely believe he predicted 9/11. But as I watch more videos and as people explain things, I come to realize, I mean, the wording is can be quite accurate. I forget how the wording went, but it described 2 towers being broken down by something flying, I believe. But ever since then, it's very difficult for me to believe anyone from the past predicting the future, because if it can be interpreted in many ways, then, and not specific, then it's very difficult for me to believe. Because if you interpret the Twin Towers being struck as in, it could have been like the movie Lord of the Rings, the Twin Towers, or whatever else. But you can make a prediction today. As impossible as it might seem, given enough time, it will eventually happen. So I'm wondering, in terms of this, given enough time, we will learn everything about the universe. Everything about the universe, given enough time. And that's the key word there, given enough time. Because right now, medical science, all the scientists are just born. Just yesterday, science was born, in a sense. It's relatively new. We're still trying to understand it, trying to understand the universe and all that. Let me continue on. Stop talking.
4th and 5th April. Unknowability, the limits to knowledge. I was in the Shivananda Yoga Ashram in Bahamas a couple of weeks ago, not for a cruise, for giving talks. And there was this mathematician from Oxford who was going to give talks afterwards, Marcus du Sautoy. And the subject of his talk was on science. The subject was what we cannot know. So the limits to knowledge, Vivekananda says, we feel we should be able to know, but very soon we come up against the more we know, the more we see we do not know.
I want to ask this question so bad to them. Given enough time, will we know everything in the universe? And probably the easiest answer they can come up with right away would be no. But I will ask them again. Given enough time, stressing that out, enough time, meaning it could be like 1 billion, trillion years into the future, will we be able to know everything in the universe?
And this is Maya, the limits to knowledge. Our senses drag us outwards to see, to hear, to smell, to experience this world, to taste this world. And sense pleasure promises enjoyment and satisfaction and happiness and gives us some satisfaction too, but always unfulfilled. Always unfulfilled. The more we try, the more our hunger and our barrenness increases. Somerset Maugham, very beautiful, he says that quote, the more single-mindedly you chase pleasure, the more you find nothing pleasing anymore. The limits to the, and Vivekananda says, we are drawn, yet we are drawn again and again, like moths to the fire. And we keep, after knowing this also, we keep repeating those behaviors, those learned patterns of behavior. His words, until crippled, we are swept away by death. And this is Maya, the limits of sense pleasures. With every breath we feel we are free. We have freedom. I'm acting of my own will. And yet when I investigate, when I try to act in life, do something in life, I run up against barriers. I see that there are limits to my free will. The more I investigate, this is one perpetual favorite for philosophers in the East and the West, throughout the world, throughout history, is their free will.
I watched videos of that one too, and both sides seem to have a very convincing argument. That is something interesting too, where some say that we do not have free will because everything in a sense is pre-programmed and instinctual in us. So for example, one example I heard of, that you're holding a pot of hot water and your child is next to you, and then you grab the pot and then you realize it's hot and you drop it. Instinctually you would drop it to protect yourself from being burnt, but realizing there's a child there, you grab it and hold on to it. That would be an indication of free will, because why would you hold on to that to protect your child when when instinctually you want to protect yourself? You're contradicting your instinctual nature, which would be free will. But what if the counter argument, maybe, again, this is a long time ago, not a long time ago, but it was a long time ago since I watched these kind of videos, but where the reason why you grab it to hold on to counteract your instinct of protecting yourself, to protect your child, because you realize that, well, not realize, but you know that your child is your future. You ultimately will come to an end. This is my interpretation of what they said. You ultimately come to an end, but your child will be the future of who you are, your representation, your genes, your everything, your knowledge, your you in a different you. If that makes any sense. Basically, generally, children look up to their parents and follow their parents as an example, generally speaking. And you try to impart your knowledge onto your child, and therefore they, in a sense, become you. They're genetically mostly you, half of them is you, and then the knowledge that you obtain, that you pass on to your children to try to make them make wise decisions in life, that is also part of you into them. but they are still themselves. So you instinctually protect them, because that again is also not free will, because instinctually you protect your children, instinctually you protect yourself. So in a sense, there's not free will there. By saying that your favorite color is one thing and not the other, you think that's free will, but it's not. Maybe there's some influences in your life when you're growing up that's the reason why your favorite color is blue or red or yellow or whatever. The reason why you like eggs instead of broccoli, or you like broccoli instead of eggs, it's not because you have free will, but because of your genes, your genetic makeup, the genes that are passed down from your parents. This is the reason why some people like some things and some people don't like some things. You think it's free will that you like something or not. No, that's probably genetics. It's so interesting. Sorry, I keep talking too much.
Because we feel there is free will. And yet science seems to say, determinism, that there cannot be free will. Religion says, all is God's will, not yours.
Yeah.
Philosophical investigation, even neuroscience investigations, the Libet experiments and all. So many kinds of ideas have been generated, all of which seem to show that we do not have free will. This every breath we feel, we are free. And the universe telling us again and again, we are not free at all. And this is Maya. Swami Vivekananda says, this is Maya.
Okay. So the idea of free will being an illusion, but that doesn't really make it Maya. I mean, sure, okay. Say that it is so. That doesn't necessarily mean that this is a non-duality world, though. It just means that you don't understand your true self. But I guess that could go to prove to the point that maybe thinking that yourself is the true you may be also a part of Maya. Maybe, I guess. But maybe I'll save it for later if I remember what I was thinking of.
Then he says, happiness, our pursuit of happiness, the more we change social reforms, feudalism, unhappiness, we change it into communism, into capitalism, into socialism. Becker, the denial of death, he calls them our bloody utopias. As we try to get happiness from this world and make great changes in this world, we seem to redistribute misery. That's all. Swami Vivekananda says, like rheumatism, you chase it from here, it goes there. You're just redistributing misery.
Whew. Maybe so, but I guess the problem is would we rather have everyone to be miserable or just a few? I mean, it's a sad either way, honestly, but it's capitalism gives the hope of movement between poor and rich. Communism gives the idea that everyone is equal when it's still not. I don't know about socialism. I mean, socialism, I believe, gives everyone equal power, supposedly, but I don't know if there's a lot of socialistic worlds, but they're generally socialistic capitalists. I'm not too familiar with that, but at least with capitalism, it can be a terrible thing turn into like socialism. The terrible thing about socialism, I believe, goes to communism. Socialism, the worst extremes of it becomes communism. Capitalism, the worst extremes of it becomes corporatism. I don't think that word's been used. I'm not sure. It has to have. I could not have invented that word. But where basically corporations end up running the government, or there would be no government. Corporations would be the ultimate power, and they would basically have control over all of the market. What was I going with that? Anyway, let's continue on.
And this is Maya. He says, as we increase the power of enjoyment, we are increasing the power of suffering too. He says in geometric progression, little bit of increase in the power of enjoyment, multiple times increase in the power of suffering. He says, who can enjoy food like a dog eating? But the dog suffers also tremendously. He says the primitive man in the cave Stone Age society, Uh, could take a cut on the hand, it would heal him very soon. He would be very hardy, but crude. Will be completely unable to enjoy the products of our Broadway and the museum mile. No, makes no difference to that person. But he says the modern man, cultured and refined, has power of enjoyment and aesthetic sensibilities multiplied manyfold, but a pinprick can kill him. And I was thinking, in our modern context, there's a lot of psychological studies going on. The new generation of children coming up, protected, nurtured to be super kids.
But has become so fragile in many ways, socially and virally. Basically, I remember hearing somewhere that we've kept our environment so clean that children are becoming more allergic to peanuts, for example, because they didn't eat peanuts when they're younger, or they're not exposed to germs when they're younger, they're not outside playing. Our house environment's so clean that their immunity system didn't get a chance to fight them early on. So later on in life, they become very ill to these things that are normally not so hazardous, I suppose. And also socially, because generally speaking, when we socially interact with each other, we end up coming up with so many hardships in our lives. Friends, fighting amongst each other, social interactions, which we're kind of separating ourselves through phones now. We're not interacting in person anymore. Then we become socially inept at interacting with human beings that it kind of, how do I say, hinders, it's like a shock to the system. Like when we interact with people, it becomes so foreign, I suppose. I mean, I do remember this one show where it shows two Japanese couples who got married. They never kissed, they never really even touched each other, and when they're about to make love, they died before it, because they got so overwhelmingly excited, because they're so suppressed in their nature of human interaction, that their hearts couldn't take the interaction, because they have not really interacted with people. They're kind of stayed, I guess, they in their lives they stayed kind of closed off to society. That meeting people is a very intense situation.
No exposure to dirt.
Yep, there you go.
Vulnerability to infections. The number of studies are showing multiple kind of allergies are coming up. Why? Where did these allergies come from? They're coming because they were not exposed to nature. No contact with
even other people too.
But not just physical vulnerability, emotional vulnerability. All the time saying you're great, you're the greatest.
Yep.
If you've done, if you got it right, you're the greatest. If you got it wrong, you're still pretty great.
Yeah, and that's a problem. It's the fact that whenever these people who are raised up, who never experience, how do I say this? Experience not trauma, but difficulties in their life. The second they hit difficulties for the first time, they will act exactly like a child. And if they did not find this out when they're a child, this is an adult we're talking about acting like a child, because they never have failed in the entirety of their life until that very moment. And that is a very sad factor. This is something that I see in Western world or in America, but I have a feeling once countries become more developed, I'm wondering if this is just a symptom of that, of a developed country, and not necessarily something in the Western country. It just so happens that the Western country is generally developed, even though there's still poor people in all countries, even Western countries. But it's just the fact that there are certain metropolitan cities that more than ever is actually where these people who wants to protect children say, oh, you're the greatest, you're the best, even if you fail, you're still the greatest kind of deal happening, because it is in this metropolitan areas around the world, regardless of where it's at, I'm sure, they protect their children so much that they don't want to see them suffering. And by never seeing suffering or never seeing trouble, they don't know how to handle it when they go older, and that's a very big problem. God, I'm talking too
And
much.
shielded from failure, shielded from criticism, shielded from any kind of humiliation, nothing. The hard knocks of life shielded by parents. The result is, when these children come out into society, a little bit of criticism, a little bit of failure, automatic. It's bound to happen. A little suffering, physical, and they fall apart. They become outraged and indignant, and why is this happening to me? It's like a little child who's never been scolded. The first time the child is scolded, it throws a tantrum. How can you do this to me? It's like...
I've never been treated this way.
But suffering is often necessary for growth.
Yes.
That guy.
It's weird to say that suffering and hardship is what genuinely defines us, because it shows what kind of persons we are, how we handle suffering, how we handle hardship. And generally speaking, the more hardship that you go through in life, hopefully the better prepared you are. It doesn't nothing is guaranteed except for death, but going through hardship will generally mean that you should be able to handle situations, because going through massive hardship and then you going through a hardship, you'd be like, oh, that's nothing. I mean, it's no big deal kind of deal.
I don't know if the example is appropriate. There's one, I heard this several years ago. The Japanese are fond of a particular sea fish, which is very tasty. So they decided that they're going to cultivate it in enclosed fishery lagoons, so that they can cultivate much more, instead of trying to going out to sea and trying to catch those ones. Have a whole crop of them. So they cultivated, and they got a bountiful crop of those, yield of that particular kind of fish. But there was no taste anymore in those fishes. They're bigger, but more of them, but no taste. They thought, what is wrong? Why aren't they tasty? And then they discovered in the sea,
they had to fight predators.
Those fish are chased by sharks. And when they chase, they fear they produce a particular kind of hormone or something which gives taste.
That's weird.
So what they did was, a solution, they introduced a baby shark to that lagoon. And so that baby shark can't eat too many. So if they eat it up, there's no use. But it's enough to scare the fish. And so this fish go round and round, and the little shark chases them around, and the fish become tasty. Now,
that's terrible.
This development, and we have heard the story of how if you try to help a cocoon and by opening it up and letting it, the butterfly can't fly, because that exercise, we have heard the stories. I don't know how true it is, but it is true that the more you increase the power of enjoyment, the more refined, the more protected, the more vulnerable, the more weak, the more prone to suffering. And this is Maya, Swami Vivekananda says. He speaks about he says, a mother loves her child, no end, dotes upon the child. It is her whole life. The child is her whole life. And the child, perhaps son, grows up to be a brute and abuses the mother and is a source of misery to her. And yet she cannot give up the child. And society perhaps praises her for it and criticizes the child for being ungrateful. And yet the mother knows it is not really love. It is something that she cannot shake off. It's a kind of obsession, kind of a weakness. And she would perhaps be better off shaking that thing off. And yet she cannot. And this is Maya. It's from Vivekananda directly. The drama of life. We come into this life not a blank slate. Vivekananda says it, like the poet said, we come trailing clouds of glory, but he says some of us come trailing clouds of black smoke too. So some scars, past life, we have had many past lives. And we live in this life. In youth, it is all golden, full of hope and possibilities. As we grow older, we become older and more disappointed and bitter. Maybe wiser, but bitter.
Oh God, I hope I don't become bitter. But wiser, I certainly hope so.
And then finally, death comes and sweeps us away from the stage of life. We see in a stage of life, we were kids there. One monk, Dutch, in our order, he is from the Netherlands. So when his parents were about to pass away or to die, he went back to Netherlands to see them for one last time. And he said, later on he came and told me, they were in an assisted living facility, But he went to their family house and he said, how interesting. The same house where I and my brothers and sisters, we grew up. We played there in that garden. We lived in those rooms. Other children are playing there. Other children are living in those rooms. Other dads and mums are living there. The stage is the same. The actors are different. We are gone. Death sweeps us away. And Vivekananda adds poignantly, victorious or defeated, we do not know. And this is Maya. Krishna and Narada, they are walking together, and Narada says to Krishna, same question, oh Krishna, can you tell me what is Maya? Krishna says, ask me something else. And Narada says, no, I want to know this. Krishna says, all right, you asked for it, but before that, I'm very thirsty, could you go and get me a little water to drink? Narada says, immediately I'll do that, please wait here. And he walks to the nearby village, to the well there, and he sees this girl drawing water there. When he comes near the young lady, he's captivated by her beauty, and he says, could you give me a pot of water, a jar of water? And she says, certainly, sir. And then he starts talking with her, and they become friendly, and he's so enamored of her. She brings him home and introduces him to her father, and they like him so much, and he likes them, and he falls in love with this girl, and he proposes marriage. The father accepts him and gives him the family business, and he settles down there.
It's a trap.
And they're very happy. They have their first child as years go by, the second child and the third child.
Oh, Krishna. You devil, you. You tricked him, and he knew it.
And years later, one day at night, and he's a busy householder now with a lot of responsibilities, a flood comes, a flash flood. No alert those days, mobile phone. And the water is rising. In terror, Narada gets up and grabs hold of the baby child and the other child and the more grown teenage child. The first child and his wife, 3 kids, and a bundle of the possessions, and somehow staggers out into the rising flood waters. Before he can do anything, the baby is swept away from his shoulders, and the other child is swept away from his arm. Finally, his eldest child and his beloved wife, they're all swept away. Jesus. And he's thrown on the shore, weeping and lamenting, and he loses consciousness. And he wakes up slowly, and he sees Krishna standing and looking at him. He says, Narada, wherever have you been? It's nearly half an hour I've been waiting.
Half an hour?
12 years of his life have passed, and it's been half an hour only. And this is Maya, Vivekananda says. Sri Ramakrishna, he gives the example of a monk in Dakshineshwar.
I guess that's a good way of explaining Maya, but so it's a matter of perception? Because one perceived time through 12 years, the other perceived time in just 30 minutes, relative to each other. Time and space is relative as well. I hear that if you go out into the atmosphere, or a little bit further out from Earth, maybe somewhere in orbit, I think you age just a little bit slowly, like 0.000000001 seconds slower or something like that. But it's all relative to something, though. That's why I do say that word a lot, because it's happiness and sadness is all relative to one another. So I could be the happiest person, or not happiest person in the world. I could be extremely happy to a sad person, and very sad to a happy person.
He says there's a wonderful monk who came to the temple garden of Dakshineshwar, and he would stay in his little room, and he would never come out. He would never mix with anybody. He would never talk with anybody. He spent the whole day in meditation and prayer. One day, you know, the Bengal monsoon, dark clouds come and covers everything. The whole sky is covered, and the temple and the river and the city, they all become dark and gloomy. And then a strong wind came and blew the sky, the dark clouds away, and there was a blue shining sky again. And this monk, he for the first time came out of his room, And he laughed out loud and he started dancing. And then Sri Ramakrishna goes to him and asks him, "You did not come out all these days. Now what is it that you have seen that you are laughing and dancing?" And then the sadhu said in his Hindi, he said it in Hindi, he said, "Ye samsar ka maya aisa hi hai." The maya of samsara is just like that. Blue, shining sky, everything is all right. Suddenly dark clouds come. And it's all dark and gloomy and terrible. And then wind comes and blows it away and it's all back and shining again. This is the maya of samsara. Swami Vivekananda gives his approach to maya. He says, our very being, our life, our very being is this contradiction. These contradictions he showed, a series of paradoxes and contradictions, and this is maya. He says, our very being in this is this. Maya is not a theory, is not an explanation of the world. These are Vivekananda's words, very important. Because so far, the non-dualists have been struggling to provide an explanation because they've been asked for an explanation. Maya is not an explanation, not a theory to explain the world. Then what is it? He says Maya is simply a statement of fact. It's simply a description of the sheer contradictoriness, the sheer paradoxical nature of life. Just a simple description. That is Maya. He says the common folk in India, they say all is Maya, sab Maya hai. And he says that I think that's as wonderful a statement as you're going to get about the state of things in this world. All this is indeed Maya.
I do want to hear those arguments, to hear the counter arguments and arguments pro and con to Maya. That's interesting. The thing is, though, is that I don't. So far, he's just going over the oversimplified version of the arguments. I did understand the 7 ones from the dualistic view, but I still want to hear a deeper explanation of those, and then explanation of the non-dualistic, saying that world is Maya. I don't necessarily think that it's an illusion, though. Maya being illusion or paradox. I definitely need to look up the definition of paradox to have a full understanding of it. But to say that, again, about being immortal, we ourselves seek immortality to live forever, but that is, I will say, a Maya. But the reality of immortality is through our genes and through our children. That is the reality, and that is not, in my opinion, Maya. So there is reality. Just because we have false senses or false illusions of things doesn't necessarily make everything an illusion. The idea itself is illusion, but maybe not the world. It's because we have, oh good lord, I guess this would support non-dualistic stuff, because we interpret the world or words or whatever to be something that it's not. And they would probably use that as, because we interpret ourselves as the true beings, maybe we are not. But there's nothing to support that. I mean, no proof to support that. And that's the problem. That's the difficult nature of the non-dualistic, I believe. Some people say they have seen it, and probably they have. I'm trying to understand it. But I want to hear the arguments, and the arguments he made does make sense, and the counter arguments also make sense to a degree. I just need to have a deeper understanding of both to formulate my own opinion about it.
Now, there are 2 powerful objections to this approach. One is, Vivekananda himself brings it up. One is, why are you saying that all this is Maya and this you should transcend this? This is paradoxical, contradictory. There is a school of philosophical thought, very powerful. Vivekananda himself says, in Germany, certain philosophers have proposed, he meant Hegel. He actually meant Hegel. That if you look at Hegel's philosophy, he says, literally, it sounds so Vedantic. He says the absolute, the spirit, is manifesting itself in this universe through lower to higher and higher manifestations till it will become the absolute perfect being. So we are going from primitive manifestations to better manifestations. Things are becoming better and better and better. It's a progressive development. Hegel's whole idea of dialectics comes from that. And it's a very powerful idea. And it influenced the course of Western thought. From Hegel to, to Marx is a direct line. Marx just removed the spirit aspect of it, took the dialectics and material dialecticism and Marxism and all of that. So very powerful development of Western thought comes from Hegel. And Hegel's, he said, when you read his logic, the very first line, how pure being or the spirit manifests itself as non-being. And from being and non-being, this dialectical process comes this universe, comes change. And like that, the Hegelian dialectic. Now, Vivekananda strongly opposes this. By the way, when I read this first, I was impressed by with how Vedantic it sounded. If you read the first few lines of Hegel's logic, so there was a conference in the New School, a Hegelian scholar was going to speak, a young Hegelian scholar, Moder from Slovenia, Stephen Moder. So I went to hear the talk, and they were very philosophical crowd, beards and backpacks and scruffy hair and intense looks, and they sort of looked at me. I was weird enough to fit into that, so when it was time for Q&A, I asked the scholar, Moder, that, it just might be my conditioning, but I see certain resonances between what Hegel has said here, at least at the beginning, not later on, but at the beginning what he has said, and Upanishadic thought. And remember, the background is Hegel had a very poor opinion of Indian and Chinese philosophy. He said all philosophy it's in Europe, and there's no philosophy worth the name in India or in China. So, but it seems very Upanishadic, Vedantic. And he said, his response was very interesting. He's a leading scholar of Hegel now. It seems it's a new trend in Hegelian studies. He said, you are absolutely right, Swami. It's entirely from there. It's that very thought from the Upanishadic idea, the expression of Brahman. And I said, but maybe it's just they are echoes, or resonances, similarities. Then he said to me, Moder, in the whole gathering, in front of everybody, he said, you are just being polite. Hegel stole it, his words, Hegel stole the entire thing from there. He says, steal it from there, my idea, no credit to them, because they couldn't have invented it, they are backward, barbarians, there's nothing there. I thought I've never heard this, but I asked a Hegelian scholar, Ayon Maharaj. So who gave a talk here. He's a well-known scholar on Hegel. So he said, yes, this is a new line of investigation. How much did actually Hegel know about Asian philosophy, and how much he took from there? I, in fact, asked another philosopher whom you might recognize, Zizek, Slavoj Zizek. He's a superstar, crazy. You just have to look at Zizek. So he spoke in the Schwarzman building, the New York Public Library here in Manhattan, near Bryant Park. So I went to attend that because I have heard him speak on YouTube and I've read his work earlier. So I was very interested. He is, in one word, crazy. So if you listen to him for 10 minutes also, you will know. He says the most outrageous things. But he says it for effect. If you actually wait a little bit, it's not so outrageous. He is actually saying something good. For example, outrageous thing, right here in the New York Public Library, when he was giving his talk, he said this. And even just saying this can get me into trouble. But listen to the whole explanation, which is a very good point he makes. He said, Gandhi is actually more violent than Hitler.
Is it because of ideas? Once an idea is implanted, it's very difficult to remove.
Everybody looking so outraged. What? How dare you say that? And the people around me looking like this. I said, wait, I know him. So, why? He says, Gandhi actually destroyed the British Empire by his non-violence. He changed the world. What did Hitler change? Nothing. The same old world, more violence, and then its same world continued after that. So Gandhi is actually more violent than Hitler. So he speaks like that. Anyway, So that's why I was a little hesitant. If I go up to him, a monk like this, and ask a question, I don't know what he will say. Which is, I don't mind, but so I went up to him and asked him the same question because he's one of the leading scholars of Hegel in the world today. So I asked him, Professor Zizek, what do you think of Hegel's views of Indian philosophy? And he said, he's a very strong Slovenian accent. Oh, he's just studied secondary sources. He didn't know enough. He didn't know enough. And this is somebody, remember who is saying this? His background is Marxist and Freudian, psychoanalytic and Marxism. This is the background from which he comes. So he is absolutely no friend of any kind of religion or spirituality. But he said Hegel did an injustice to Indian philosophy. But he also said something interesting, just as a way, just as an aside, I'll share it. I said, what do you think about Schopenhauer? Because, Schopenhauer loved Indian philosophy. He said, he read the Upanishads. It was his favorite reading. Every day in the night, he would read a few pages of the Upanishads and go to sleep before that. Before going to sleep, he would read the few pages of the Upanishads. He said, I consider no other study in the world as beneficial as the study of these Upanishads, the translation, except perhaps the original. These Upanishads have been the solace of my life and will be the solace of my death. Schopenhauer. His masterpiece, The World as Will and Idea. The World as Will and Idea. In the first chapter, he says, what I shall say in these volumes, Schopenhauer says, what I shall say in these volumes was best known to the ancient Hindus. They called it Maya. So I asked Zizek, what do you think of Schopenhauer? But he had an interesting point of view. He said, I think even Schopenhauer westernized Indian thought. Right? Interesting, because Vivekananda also has the same opinion. So what is Vivekananda's objection? The spirit is expressing itself, everything is getting better and better and better, ultimately it will reach perfection. Hitler loved that, by the way. It's expressing itself, and now the best expression now is the state, and of course in the state it means the German state, and of course in the German state it means the Nazi state, and of course the best expression of that is I, Hitler, so the ultimate expression of the absolute. Anyway, Vivekananda's objection is this. Any kind of expression is limitation, right? To actually, what is expression? Name and form, time, space, and causation, a thing. No matter how beautiful a thing, no matter how advanced something, it's still a thing. It is one thing and not the other thing. If it is an expression in time, space, and causation, it's a finite thing. The infinite can express itself only in finite things. So any kind of expression, no matter how wonderful, will still be finite. The infinite cannot be expressed as the infinite. This is the deep, fundamental flaw in Hegelian thought. That ultimately it will become the absolute. No, it will become an imitation of the absolute. So then what is the answer? Vivekananda says, the answer the ancient Vedantins found was not in the flow of Maya, but against the current. That the infinite is expressing itself and experiencing itself in all these ways, and finally realizes that true peace is not to be found here. True fulfillment is not to be found here. Completion is not to be found here. Infinity is not to be found here. And then begins the movement inwards. Vivekananda says two words, pravritti and nivritti. Pravritti means circling outwards, wider and wider circles into the universe. Nivritti means circling inwards. And he says true spirituality begins with this inward movement. He says renunciation, therefore, is the basis of spirituality. Peace is not to be found in a thing out there. Peace is not to be found in the object. It is to be found in the subject. So the source, movement back to the source, to Brahman, that is spirituality. That is Vedanta. Another objection, the second great objection comes, he says, which is more common here in the world today. Very few of us, seriously, in Manhattan, if you ask, are you a Hegelian or something? What? They'll look at you strangely and walk away from you. So very few are Hegelians. But many people are what might be called, Vivekananda, he says the second objection, agnostics. We really don't know all this. Absolute expressing itself, maybe, maybe not, who knows. All we know is this life and try to make the best of this life. Somehow muddle through. Try to make hay make hay while the sun is shining? Yes, while the sun shines. Vivekananda says this position has a great flaw. The flaw is this. It says take life minus the ideal component. The moment we have life, moment we are here, all of us, we seek to transcend it. We want more. We want something transcending this world. We want God, nirvana, moksha, transcendence, fulfillment. The moment we have something, we seek to overflow. Life overflows it. So this ideal component, which has been there from immemorial times, from the primitive societies up to modern times, in all our religion, our spirituality, our idealism, agnosticism seems to say that just take the material aspect of life, just the commonplace aspect of life, and leave out all of that. That's a very limited point. It might satisfy you. It will not satisfy the next person. Why? Religion, art, spirituality, scientific quest, all of them seek to go beyond what we already have. How can you say that this much only is life? So agnosticism has this great, great defect. It takes a very limited snapshot of life and leaves out the rest. It cannot fulfill your heart. You will go beyond it. What is beyond it? The quest for freedom. Quest for freedom beyond Maya. It has always been there. Something within us says, not this, neti neti. There is something higher than this. Freedom. Vivekananda says that in the most primitive of religions, when you have all these deities, the god of thunder, the god of sun, or the rain, we have these ideas, these gods. Who are these gods? They are personified ideas of our freedom. I cannot do these things. I am subject to death, disease, and hunger. Here is a God who is free of these things. Beautiful, perfect, immortal. The polytheistic religions began that way, with multiple manifestations of our conception of freedom, freedom from Maya. As religion advanced, we came to the idea of one ultimate reality, beyond Maya. This ultimate reality, beyond Maya, beyond time, space, and causation, who creates this entire universe? This is the God of the monotheistic religions. That one God. The great insight that the religions in the Middle East had, the Abrahamic religions, that there is one God, that one ultimate reality rules over this entire universe, beyond this universe. And there the monotheistic religion stopped, whether it's the Jehovah of the Jews, or the Father in heaven, or Allah, or the theistic religions in India with Vishnu, or the Divine Mother, or Shiva. But Vedanta begins there. Vivekananda said that's the beginning of Vedanta. That is in fact dualistic Vedanta. Vedanta goes further. Further, that God who is beyond time, space, and causation is also within time, space, and causation as the immanent reality of this entire universe. Everywhere in this universe is that one reality, within all beings, in and through all these existences. An immanent God, transcendent and immanent God. Sarvam khalvidam Brahma. All this is indeed that divinity.
I will say him explaining this gets me a little bit better understanding of, say, the Christian or Catholic gods. Strangely enough.
Spinoza's God, the great philosopher, 17th century. Spinoza. Einstein here. By the way, I mentioned Rebecca Goldstein. She's one of the leading authorities on Spinoza. So she, in her book, in a talk, she mentioned Einstein. In fact, Einstein said, here in Princeton, he was here, he said, the only God I believe in is Spinoza's God. The God who reveals himself through the orderly workings of the universe, as this universe, not the God who concerns himself with the doings of mortal man. And then he wrote a poem. Einstein wrote a poem. It's available. If you see Einstein's poem on Spinoza, full of, he says, this holy man, he says, to an admiration of Spinoza. Spinoza's God, a pantheistic, I'd say a little bit of injustice to Spinoza to call him pantheistic. Panentheistic would be a more precise word. But anyway, God as this entire universe, as appearing as this universe. And yet, this is not non-dualism. All this is Brahman. If you literally take it that way, it is Vishishtadvaita, qualified monism. Spinoza's God is this entire universe is God, or a part of God. The entire insentient universe and us sentient beings, we are parts of the divine. So this is Spinoza's conception. Like our body, hands and feet and head, all parts of one integral entity called my body. Similarly, we are all parts of one divine reality. Goes further. When you say all this is Brahman, it can be interpreted as Vishishtadvaita. But when you say all this is not, Brahman alone is, then you come to Advaita. Mary Hale wrote in a poem to Vivekananda, I have understood what you have taught, that all you are saying, you are teaching everything is God. And Vivekananda said, I have never taught such strange doctrine, that all is God. Mary Hale protested. She said, you said it. You said those very words, that all is God. He said, no, what I meant is, all is not, God only is. Brahman only is the only reality. That which was outside time, space and causation as the God of religion, which becomes the Vishishtadvaita, the one divine unity of this universe, Spinoza's God. In Advaita, the final development, it is none other than you yourself. You, the individual being, you appear as subject and object, as a sentient being, as the insentient universe, as the one and the many. Advaita comes to this grand conclusion. Vivekananda says, human thought reaches there such heights that the human lung can scarce breathe there. Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. When I truly realize, I am that which I was looking for outside. Tattvamasi, that thou art. This is the reality that was hidden by Maya all along. What was hidden by Maya? You were hidden by Maya. Maya did not hide the truth from you. You are the truth. So the play of Maya was your own play. And finally you see, now you stand in the bright sunshine, sunlight, beyond darkness forever, and look back upon the same world. The same world is now transformed from a hellhole, from a struggle and strife and darkness and death and unhappiness into an immortal reality. And all this becomes, you are the stage upon which the drama of life is being staged. You transcend sorrow, you transcend misery, transcend death. Trinvantu vishve amritasya putraha. Listen, ye children of immortal bliss. Aye dhamani divyani tastu. Even ye that dwell in higher heavens. For this is the truth that even you do not know. The gods do not know this truth. Vedaham purusham mahantam. I have realized that infinite being. Aditya varnam tamasah parastat. Blazing forth like the sun, forever beyond the darkness of sorrow and death and limitation. Tameva viditva. By realizing that alone, ati mrityumeti. One goes beyond death and suffering. Nanyaf pantha vidyate ayanaya. There is no other path. All other paths lead to Maya. There is only this path. How do you realize that? That ultimate being? You realize that as the God of religion, devotion, as the God of Spinoza, that reality all around, and finally, as I myself, Aham Brahmasmi. I pray to Sri Ramakrishna, to the Holy Mother, and to Swami Vivekananda, that these insights may shine forth in our hearts in this very life, and may we be blessed by the glimpse of light beyond Maya. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ram Krishna Arpanamastu.
Okay, so I really didn't have much to say at the very end there because he was explaining a lot of things of personally never experienced or talked about or heard about. So I will say I did have a lot to say at the very beginning, not too much at the end, and I went over an hour, but I definitely do want to hear about those arguments. There are arguments and counter arguments for that. It's very interesting. I understood the 7 first ones, but I want a deeper understanding and then explanation, the counter argument for those 7. But I guess my thinking of the counter arguments that goes against non-duality is the fact that can it not be that we have duality and still have misunderstandings of the universe? I mean, just because we have misunderstanding of the universe doesn't necessarily mean that we have a misunderstanding of ourselves. But I can understand the counter argument for that. It's the fact that what Sadhguru was talking about, that our senses are flawed as well, where sometimes we see things that are not really there, that we sometimes feel things that are nothing's touched us. Like sometimes you're like, oh man, I felt someone touch me here, but no one's really touched you there. And sometimes our minds play tricks on us by we end up seeing things that are hallucinations that aren't really there. That's the reason why you can make the argument that because of these things that you yourself could be an illusion and your true self is not there. So I can understand both points of views, but I guess the ultimate thing is to, how do I say this? Experience your truth for yourself, which is a lot of people commenting on my Sadhguru video about does God exist, or I forget what the title was, where it's don't just believe in something, but experience it for yourself. So, for example, if you only ever experience duality, then for you that may be the truth. That may be the truth. Or someone who experienced non-duality, and that may be the truth. And which I think what Swami was talking about a little bit earlier, I think in part 1 of my videos, that he doesn't necessarily know what the truth is, I believe, if I remember correctly. And I don't know if he necessarily believes. I'm sure he talks about non-duality, and that's what I believe he believes in. But the counter argument where he's talking about where it shakes up the non-duality, which makes very good points. But again, I have to hear a deeper explanation of each side. So far, I'm more in the support of the of duality. It makes good arguments, but again, still, nonetheless, I want to hear both sides. I understand the non-duality side, where, again, like I explained earlier, about how we perceive things that could be illusions or false or contradictions, but those could be separate from oneself. And the idea that I do believe in is the fact that we believe in what we know, which is that, for me, this is the only life we have. There's no afterlife. There's no afterlife, so you gotta live the best life you can right now. That I know for sure. This life is real. Although, Turiya would say otherwise, but Swami may say otherwise. I don't know. I don't want to say what he says, but if our true selves is this big, massive consciousness, then this is not ultimate reality. But I don't know that. All I know so far is that this body, this mind is me, and this is the only life we have, so I must live it the best I can. I'm sure non-duality would say, hey, look, that may be true to you, but still, yes, live the best life you can. Do the best you can. You may not realize duality or non-duality, and this is something I can fully support regardless, is that live the best life you can, live it as happily as you can. Is there an afterlife? There's no absolute proof of it, I don't believe, or this big consciousness, I don't know. I know right now, if this is a false life, this is the most real thing that I know so far, so I'll live it the best that I can. Anyway, this is my reaction to Maya by Swami Sarvapriyananda. If you like my content, please consider subscribing. Thumbs up, thumbs down below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next vid.